I had no idea what I was going to talk about for BBC, and she read this passage from Enlightened Vagabond, The Life and Teachings of Patrul Rinpoche. And he was a very well-known and highly respected Lama in the Nyingma tradition who lived, I think, the end of last century, beginning of this century. He's the author of Words of My Perfect Teacher, and which is a book I really love because I like his approach so much. He is like, boom, and he tells you exactly the way it is, you know? And I find that approach much more effective than the approach. Okay, I need the like, okay, kid, wake up. So here are a few lines that I'll go through in the next few BBCs. So the work is called A Piece of Advice. I think it was a short text he wrote. So it starts out, at all times and in all situations, examine your mind stream moment by moment. Are thoughts positive or negative? When you recognize a thought to have a negative content, be aware of its potential for harm and lay it aside. This is crucial. Okay, so you see, he says, at all times and in all situations. So he doesn't say, when you feel like it on Sunday morning. He's saying, practice is something to do all the time, wherever you are, and because it's your life. It's not just a hobby or something you do, when you feel like it. So what are we supposed to do? Examine your mind stream moment by moment. So he doesn't say, look at your mind stream every, half an hour or hour and see what's going on. And just make sure you have a positive thought when you look at it. And in between, you can let your mind wander and go up and down and samsara as you wish. No, he says, moment by moment. And so to observe our thoughts, are they positive or negative? Yeah. Are they fueled by afflictions or are they fueled by kindness and wisdom? Yeah. And so this is a full-time occupation. Yeah. And it really is a call for us to pay attention to what's going on in our minds, even in, not only when we're focused on a task, but especially in between things. When you're walking from here to there, when you're driving to work, when you're on the subway, although who goes in the subway during the pandemic if you don't have to? When you're jogging, when you're painting, when you're on the toilet, when you're changing the baby's diapers, all the time to observe what's going on in our mind. And are we being judgmental of people? Are we being critical? Are we, off in la la land with our fantasies of all the things that we're attached to, that we expect to happen, that we haven't told the other people involved that we're expecting them to play a part in this fantasy? Yeah. So to really pay attention, and it's very interesting, when you arrive in a place, to ask yourself, what was I thinking during the time it took to get here? So you may have been driving a half an hour. What were you thinking about during that half hour? Yeah, well, I was listening to something on the radio. Yeah, and what were you thinking about while you were listening to that? And, were your thoughts on what you were listening to, were your thoughts intelligent thoughts? Or were your thoughts getting angry because you were listening to some conspiracy theory? You know, when you were listening, if you were listening to the news, were you paying attention so you could assess, the information you're getting and make a wise decision, on the information? Or are we just kind of spaced out and then, you know, thinking of what's going to happen here and where we're going to go there? Okay, because a lot of negative thoughts can happen in that way that we don't realize we're having, but then they lead to, making the full-blown resolution to carry out some kind of action. Okay, because remember that the three non-virtues of mind, covetousness, maliciousness, and wrong views, those aren't just the mental factor of attachment or antipathy and ignorance. They're developed thoughts that are planning to do a certain action. So where do those developed thoughts come from? They come from all the time when we're kind of ruminating about something, and very often we're not even aware of that we're ruminating. Yeah. So to really pay attention and evaluate. Okay, then how do we learn to evaluate, what's a virtuous thought and what's not? Well, here's where the role of studying the Dharma really is important, because this is what the texts point out to us. Especially when we study mind and mental factors, what are the virtuous mental factors? What are the non-virtuous ones? Yeah. And how do we shift? If we catch a non-virtuous one, how do we shift it to a virtuous one? And that's where the Lojong or mind training teachings come in, because they're telling us how to shift our perspective so that we see things in a more realistic way, in a more beneficial way. So to learn these things of how to identify the constructive and destructive states of mind and how to, transform the destructive ones into the constructive ones, or better yet, how to get rid of the destructive ones and create the constructive ones. So this all comes from learning the Dharma teachings. And so, we should make an effort every day if we can to do some Dharma reading, listen to a teaching, go to a Dharma center, do our meditation, somehow to keep imbuing our mind with this, and then thinking about what we read or what we listen to, and thinking of how to apply it in our daily lives. And that will give us the information we need so that when we start watching our thoughts moment by moment, we'll be able to, uh, make some wise discernment about them. Okay, so Pacharamiti then says, when you recognize a thought to have a negative content, be aware of its potential for harm and lay it aside. This is crucial. Okay, so when we see, that kind of thought that has the potential to harm because it could fuel a verbal action or a negative action, or it could fuel just more rumination where we're creating more negative karma mentally for ourselves. Yeah, recognize the potential harm of this way of thinking. Yeah, and then set that thought aside. Now, it's not so easy to just say, I'm not going to think that, okay? Personally speaking, what I found is I really need to understand why that thought is unrealistic, why it is destructive. And so to really go over that again and again and again in my mind, when I'm convinced that that perspective or that thought is really erroneous, then it's much easier to set it aside. But I can't just say to myself, oh, that's a negative thought, don't think it. It's like, don't think about pink elephants. What comes to your mind? Pink elephants, okay? So I have to really analyze and see the disadvantages of pursuing that line of thinking, yeah? And then it's easy. Set it down, And then gradually, as we become more and more accustomed to recognizing the disadvantages of these kinds of thoughts and more accustomed to the mind training teachings on how to replace them with something more realistic and more beneficial, then that becomes much easier to do, okay? So it's a thing of familiarity and practice. But if we put the energy into it, it really works and we can do that.